The M4 Sherman didn't just win wars, it changed how battles were fought. Tanks caught fire in seconds, secret versions flew through the air, and one even survived being hit 227 times. These are 20 weird facts about the M4 Sherman tank, and the bonus? Let's just say the Germans had a nickname that terrified every crew. Lock and load. This ride through history is about to get explosive. 5 men lived inside. 5 men crammed inside the Sherman's tight metal interior during combat missions. The commander stood in the turret watching for enemies through periscopes and giving orders. The gunner sat below him, aiming the big 75mm cannon at targets. The loader stood next to the gunner, grabbing heavy shells and shoving them into the cannon as fast as possible. The driver sat in the front hull on the left side, steering the 30-ton monster across rough terrain. The assistant driver sat on the right front, operating the hull machine gun and helping navigate. These 5 men lived together, fought together, and sometimes died together inside that cramped steel box. They couldn't stand up straight or stretch out during long missions that lasted hours or even days. The inside smelled like oil, gunpowder, sweat, and fear during intense battles. Crews became like brothers, trusting each other with their lives every single day in combat zones across multiple continents. Built more than any other tank. America built over 49,000 Sherman tanks during World War II between 1942 and 1945. That's more than any other tank in history from any country. Factories pumped out Shermans faster than bakeries made bread during the war. At the peak of production in 1943, American workers finished 1 complete Sherman every single hour around the clock. 11 different factories across America built them at the same time in different states. The Ford Motor Company alone built thousands of them using the same assembly lines that made cars before the war started. Workers who made family sedans suddenly found themselves welding tank armor and installing giant cannons. Women took factory jobs while men fought overseas, and they built these metal monsters with incredible speed and skill. The production numbers were so huge that America could replace losses faster than the enemy could destroy them on the battlefield. By the end of the war, Shermans outnumbered German tanks by more than 5 to 1 in most battles across Europe and the Pacific. The deadly nickname Ronson. German soldiers gave the Sherman a terrifying nickname, Ronson, named after the Ronson Lighter Company. The lighter company's slogan was, "Lights first time, every time." And German troops said Shermans caught fire just as reliably when hit. The tank's gasoline engine and ammunition storage made it burn incredibly fast once penetrated by enemy shells. Crews called it the Tommy Cooker in reference to British soldiers, or the absolutely horrible nickname, a burning coffin on tracks. When a German 80mm gun hit a Sherman, the crew had just seconds to escape before flames filled the entire tank. Many brave tank crews died trapped inside burning Shermans across battlefields in France, Germany, Italy, and North Africa. The survival rate for Sherman crews who got hit was terrifyingly low in the early years of the war. Later versions added wet ammunition storage, which meant the shells sat in water-filled containers that helped prevent fires. This simple change saved thousands of lives and made the tank much safer to operate in combat situations. The engine was from a truck. The original Sherman used a modified airplane engine, but most versions ran on the Continental R975 radial engine. This engine was designed for airplanes, but worked surprisingly well in tanks too. It produced 400 horsepower, which sounds strong, but had to move 30 tons of steel, armor, ammunition, and 5 men. The engine sat in the back of the tank and made a distinctive loud sound that everyone recognized from far away. It ran on gasoline instead of diesel fuel, which was part of why the tank caught fire so easily when hit. Gasoline burns much faster and hotter than diesel in explosions. Some later Shermans used 2 truck engines stuck together, creating what they called the twin-engine Sherman. Mechanics loved working on these engines because they were simple, and parts were everywhere since they came from regular trucks. If an engine broke down, crews could sometimes find parts at regular auto shops in liberated towns across Europe. It could float. Engineers created a special version called the DD Sherman that could actually float on water and drive onto beaches. DD stood for duplex drive, which meant it could move on land and in water. The tank had a huge canvas skirt that folded up around it like a boat hull when inflated with air. A propeller at the back pushed it through the water at about 4 miles per hour while waves crashed over the top. These swimming Shermans were supposed to land on D-Day beaches on June 6, 1944, ahead of the infantry soldiers. However, However, many sank in the rough ocean waves off Normandy, drowning their crews inside before ever reaching the sand. The waves were too high and the tanks too heavy for the canvas screens to handle properly. Out of 32 DD Shermans launched at Omaha Beach, only 2 made it to shore successfully that terrible morning. The ones that sank took their crews down with them into the cold Atlantic Ocean. Despite the losses, the ones that made it provided crucial fire support that helped save lives on the beach. Armor was actually weak. The Sherman's armor was only 2 inches thick on the front, which sounds strong but wasn't enough against German guns. German Panther and Tiger tanks had much thicker armor, some parts reaching over 4 inches of solid steel plate. A German 88mm cannon could punch right through a Sherman's front armor from over a mile away with ease. American crews knew they were outgunned and out-armored, which was absolutely terrifying for them going into battle. The Sherman's advantage was speed and numbers, not protection or firepower compared to German heavy tanks. It could drive at 25 miles per hour, much faster than the heavier German tanks that were slower. American strategy relied on sending 5 Shermans against 1 Tiger tank, knowing that 3 or 4 Shermans would probably die, but the 1 or 2 survivors would flank around and destroy the Tiger from the sides where armor was thinner. This terrible math meant many American tank crews died to eventually win battles through sheer numbers and bravery. Later in the war, crews welded extra steel plates, sandbags, and even logs onto their Shermans for extra protection, used by over 50 countries. After World War II ended in 1945, over 50 different countries used Sherman tanks in their armies. America gave thousands of them away for free or sold them cheap to allies around the world. Israel used upgraded Shermans in multiple wars against Arab countries through the 1960s and even into the 1970s. The Israeli army put better guns and diesel engines in their Shermans, making them competitive with newer tanks. Paraguay used Shermans in combat as late as the 1990s during border conflicts with neighbors in South America. Some countries in South America and Asia kept Shermans running until the 2000s for parades and ceremonies. The simple design and available parts meant mechanics could keep them running for decades after the war. Countries that couldn't afford modern tanks loved the Sherman because it was reliable, simple to fix, and still dangerous. Some are still in running condition today in museums and private collections around the entire world. The Jumbo was a beast. The M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman was a heavily armored version built specifically to lead attacks on fortified positions. Its frontal armor was doubled to over 4 inches thick, making it almost as tough as a German Tiger tank. The transmission got upgraded to handle the extra 7 tons of weight from all that additional armor plating. Only 254 Jumbo Shermans were built because they were expensive and took longer to produce than regular versions. These special tanks led charges into German defenses, absorbing hits while regular Shermans followed safely behind them. The Jumbo could survive multiple direct hits from German anti-tank guns that would destroy normal Shermans instantly. Crews loved being assigned to a Jumbo because their survival chances increased dramatically in heavy fighting. The thick armor came at a cost though. The Jumbo was slower and used more fuel than regular Shermans, but soldiers preferred being alive and slow rather than fast and dead on the battlefield. Some Jumbos survived the entire war without being destroyed despite being shot dozens of times in combat. One survived 227 hits. A single Sherman tank survived being hit 227 times during heavy combat in Europe without being destroyed. The crew kept fighting even as German shells bounced off or penetrated the armor repeatedly during intense battles. The tank's armor was pockmarked with dents, holes, and scars from bullets, shells, and shrapnel from explosions. Somehow, none of the hits caused a catastrophic fire or explosion that would have killed the crew inside. The tank was photographed after the battle, and the images showed just how incredibly beaten up it was. Every surface had damage, with some holes big enough to stick your fist through the metal. The crew must have been incredibly lucky, skilled, or both to survive that much punishment and live. This tank became famous as proof that Shermans could take serious damage and keep fighting if luck was on your side. The crew probably needed therapy after experiencing that much incoming fire and near-death experiences. That particular Sherman ended up in a military museum after the war as a testament to survival and toughness. They put a flamethrower version The M4A3R3 Zippo, Sherman replaced the main cannon with a massive flamethrower that shot burning fuel 150 feet. The Marines used these terrifying flame tanks in the Pacific Islands against Japanese bunkers and cave positions. Nothing was more feared by enemy soldiers than seeing a flame tank rolling toward their position. The flamethrower could shoot burning napalm that stuck to everything and kept burning for minutes at a time. Japanese soldiers hiding in concrete bunkers and caves had no defense against the flames that poured inside and burned everything. The flame tank carried 300 gallons of flammable fuel in armored tanks inside the Sherman's hull. One Zippo could clear entire enemy positions in minutes that would have taken regular infantry hours or days. The psychological effect was devastating. Many enemies surrendered immediately rather than face the flames that burned at over 2,000 degrees. However, flame tanks were priority targets, and Japanese anti-tank crews focused on destroying them first in every battle. Being a flame tank crew member was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire Pacific campaign. British added a massive gun. The British created the Sherman Firefly by cramming a massive 17-pounder gun into the normal Sherman turret. This gun was so powerful it could destroy any German tank, including the feared Tiger and Panther, from long range. The problem was, the gun barely fit inside the turret, and crews had to work in extremely cramped conditions. The loader had an incredibly difficult job grabbing the huge shells and loading them into the gun while crouched. British tank crews loved the Firefly because it finally gave them a fighting chance against superior German armor. The Germans learned to recognize the Firefly by its longer barrel and targeted them first in every tank battle. Over 2,000 Fireflies were built by the British during the war, and they served in every major battle in Europe. American tank crews were jealous and requested Fireflies for themselves, but they weren't available in large numbers. The Firefly proved that the Sherman chassis was adaptable and could be upgraded with better weapons successfully. Some historians believe the Firefly was the best allied tank of the entire war, considering its effectiveness. Crews personalized them like crazy. Tank crews painted names, pictures, and messages all over their Shermans to make them feel like home. Some painted girlfriends' names. Others painted fierce animals like tigers, sharks, or dragons to look intimidating and fierce. Crews painted kill marks showing how many enemy tanks or vehicles they had destroyed in combat. Some painted dice, playing cards, pin-up girls, or cartoon characters from comic books and movies they loved. Fury, In the Mood, Cool Stud, and Murder Inc. were real names painted on actual Shermans during the war. Commanders usually allowed this personalization because it improved morale and helped crews bond with their tank as a team. Each Sherman became unique and recognizable to other units, developing its own personality and reputation in the battalion. Crews spent their free time maintaining and decorating their tanks, treating them like prized possessions instead of just military equipment. Some even slept next to or inside their tanks at night to guard them and stay close. The bond between crew and machine was incredibly strong and helped them survive terrible combat situations together. Named after a Civil War general. The British Army named the tank Sherman after General William Tecumseh Sherman from the American Civil War. Americans just called it the M4 medium tank in official paperwork and military documents. General Sherman was famous for his brutal march to the sea through Georgia in 1864, where he destroyed everything in his path. The British thought the tank's ability to push forward relentlessly matched the general's aggressive fighting style perfectly. The name stuck and became famous worldwide, even though American soldiers rarely used it themselves during combat. They had dozens of nicknames for it instead, some nice, and some definitely not appropriate for kids to hear. Other American tanks got British names too, like the Grant and the Lee, continuing the Civil War general theme. The Sherman name became so iconic that even today, 80 years later, everyone recognizes it immediately. It's probably the most famous tank name in all of military history across every country in conflict. They built a recovery version. The M32 tank recovery vehicle was a Sherman without a turret designed to rescue broken or damaged tanks from battlefields. It had a huge crane boom and winch system that could lift the front of a 30-ton tank off the ground. Recovery crews drove into active battlefields under fire to save disabled tanks and bring them back for repairs. These unarmed vehicles were incredibly dangerous to operate because they couldn't fight back if attacked by enemy tanks. The crews were incredibly brave, risking their lives to save equipment and sometimes trapped crew members from destroyed tanks. The M32 could tow a damaged tank at 10 miles per hour back to safety behind friendly lines for mechanics to fix. Without these recovery vehicles, the Army would have lost thousands of repairable tanks that just needed to be pulled out. The crane could also be used to remove engines, turrets, or other heavy parts for field repairs done by mechanics. Recovery vehicle crews rarely got recognition or medals, but they saved countless tanks and lives during the entire war. Some M32s remained in service through the Korean War in the 1950s, continuing their important mission for another decade. The engine changed multiple times. Sherman tanks came with at least 5 different engine types during production, depending on what was available at factories. The Continental R975 radial aircraft engine was most common, producing 400 horsepower for decent speed and reliability. The Chrysler A57 multibank used 5 car engines bolted together in one crazy unit that produced 425 horsepower. General Motors built versions with their 6046 twin diesel engine that was more fuel efficient and safer than gasoline engines. Ford produced Shermans with their GAA V8 engine, which was smooth, powerful, and one of the most reliable options available. The different engines meant that mechanics had to know how to fix multiple completely different systems in the field. Parts weren't always interchangeable between engine types, which created huge supply and maintenance problems for repair crews. Some units had Shermans with 3 or 4 different engine types, making the maintenance officer's job an absolute nightmare. Despite this confusion, the Sherman's basic design was flexible enough to accept all these different power plants successfully. This adaptability was actually a strength because if one engine type had supply problems, others could substitute quickly. They served in Korea too. Sherman tanks fought again in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, even though they were outdated by then. North Korean T-34 tanks invaded South Korea, and American Shermans were rushed there to fight them in desperate battles. The Sherman's 75mm gun could barely penetrate the T-34's sloped armor from the front in direct confrontations. American crews had to use tactics, positioning, and teamwork to outmaneuver the more modern Soviet-designed tanks successfully. The Marines landed at Incheon with Sherman tanks that provided crucial fire support during the amphibious invasion in September 1950. Sherman served throughout the Korean War in infantry support roles, destroying bunkers, buildings, and enemy positions with high explosive shells. The mountainous Korean terrain was extremely difficult for tanks, with narrow roads and steep hills everywhere limiting movement. Despite being over 10 years old by then, Shermans proved they could still fight effectively in modern warfare. Many Shermans were finally retired after Korea, having served in 2 major wars across 3 continents over more than a decade. Some ended up as targets on practice ranges, while others went to allied countries or museums for preservation. Crews could escape fast. The Sherman had multiple hatches that allowed the crew to escape quickly if the tank caught fire or got disabled. The commander and loader had hatches in the turret top that opened in seconds for emergency exits during combat. The driver and assistant driver had hatches in the front hull that they could push open to climb out fast. This design saved many lives when tanks were hit and started burning from fuel fires or ammunition explosions. Crews trained constantly on emergency escape procedures, practicing in darkness and with smoke to simulate real combat conditions. The fastest crews could evacuate all 5 men in under 10 seconds when their lives depended on it. However, many crews still died trapped inside when hatches jammed from battle damage or when fires spread too quickly. Veterans tell stories of crews who saved each other by pulling wounded men through hatches under intense enemy fire. The escape hatches were one of the Sherman's best features and gave crews a fighting chance at survival. German tanks often had fewer escape routes, making them deadlier for their own crews when damaged in battle. It had a gyro stabilizer. The Sherman was one of the first tanks ever with a gyroscopic stabilizer for the main gun that helped accuracy. This system kept the gun steady even when the tank was moving over rough ground and bumpy terrain. Crews could fire on the move with reasonable accuracy, while German tanks had to stop completely to shoot effectively. This gave American tank crews a huge tactical advantage in fast-moving battles, where stopping meant becoming an easy target. The stabilizer wasn't perfect and didn't work great at high speeds, but it was still revolutionary for tank warfare. warfare. Gunners could keep the gun pointed at a target while the driver maneuvered around obstacles, craters, and rough battlefield terrain. This technology was years ahead of what other countries had in their tanks during World War II. The Germans didn't develop similar systems until much later, giving the Sherman an edge in mobile combat situations. British crews particularly loved this feature and used it extensively in the North African desert campaigns against Rommel's forces. The Gyro stabilizer represented American engineering innovation and helped compensate for the Sherman's weaker gun and armor disadvantages. Some had rockets. The T-34 Calliope was a Sherman with 60 rocket tubes mounted on top of the turret in a distinctive rack. It looked absolutely crazy, like something from a science fiction movie about future warfare gone wild. The rockets could launch all at once in a devastating barrage that covered a huge area with explosions. This was perfect for attacking enemy positions, breaking through defensive lines, or destroying concentrations of enemy troops. However, the rocket launcher made the tank much taller, easier to spot, and a priority target for enemy gunners. The empty rocket tubes also made a loud whistling sound when wind blew through them, giving away the tank's position. After firing all 60 rockets, the launcher was useless weight until it could be reloaded with new ammunition. Crews could detach the entire rocket system and fight as a normal Sherman if needed during extended battles. The psychological impact on enemy soldiers was huge. The sight and sound of 60 rockets incoming was absolutely terrifying. Only a few hundred Calliopes were built because they were complex, expensive, and not very practical for most combat situations. It became a movie star. The Sherman appeared in hundreds of war movies from the 1940s through today, making it the most filmed tank ever. Fury, starring Brad Pitt in 2014, used real running Sherman tanks and showed realistic tank combat for modern audiences. Saving Private Ryan, A Bridge Too Far, The Battle of the Bulge, and Kelly's Heroes all featured Shermans prominently in battle scenes. The tank's distinctive shape and historical importance made it perfect for Hollywood movies about World War II stories. Some running Shermans belong to private collectors who rent them to movie studios for thousands of dollars per day of filming. The tank sounds, looks, and moves like audiences expect from watching decades of war films featuring these machines. Stunt coordinators love Shermans because they're reliable and safe compared to more exotic or rare tank types from museums. Some movie Shermans have appeared in dozens of different films over the years, playing different tanks in different battles. The Sherman's Hollywood fame helped keep interest in tank history alive for new generations who never experienced the actual war. Museums report increased visitors after major Sherman movies release, showing the tank's continued cultural impact and historical importance. Bonus fact, the engine was in the wrong place. Engineers put the Sherman's engine in the back, which was actually the wrong place for crew safety and tank design. German and Soviet tanks put engines in the front, which provided extra protection for the crew sitting behind all that metal. The Sherman's rear engine placement meant that if a shell penetrated from behind, it would hit the engine and fuel first. However, this also meant frontal hits went straight through to where the crew sat, with nothing to stop the shell. The rear engine placement was chosen because it made the tank easier and faster to build in American factories with assembly lines. It also made engine maintenance and replacement much easier for mechanics working in field conditions under time pressure. The design choice prioritized production speed over crew protection, which was controversial then and remains debated by historians today. Thousands of Sherman crew members died because of this design choice, but the massive production numbers arguably won the war. It's a dark reminder that war involves terrible choices between protecting individual soldiers and winning the larger conflict. Engineers knew the trade-offs but chose production efficiency because America needed thousands of tanks immediately, not perfect tanks eventually. From floating across oceans to shooting rockets and flames, the M4 Sherman proved that success in war isn't always about being the biggest or strongest. This tank won through numbers, reliability, and the incredible bravery of the men who fought inside it despite knowing the dangers. If you learned something powerful today about these steel beasts, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that'll change how you see the past.